You're 6 years old when they choose you. For the next 30 years, you'll live in unimaginable luxury, servants, wealth, power that senators envy. But one mistake, one whispered rumor, and they'll lower you into the earth while you're still breathing. Welcome to History Snapshots. This is the story of the Vestal virgins. In the heart of the Roman Forum, surrounded by marble temples and the constant roar of commerce, stood the Atrium Vestae, a secluded sanctuary where 6 women maintained the sacred flame of Vesta, goddess of hearth and home. These weren't ordinary priestesses. They were chosen between ages 6 and 10 from Rome's noble families, selected by the Pontifex Maximus himself in a ceremony that severed them from their father's legal authority, the only women in Rome granted such independence. The moment a girl was selected, she ceased to be her father's property. She became property of the state, of the goddess, of Rome itself. Her childhood ended in an instant. She would serve for exactly 30 years, 10 learning the rituals, 10 performing them, 10 teaching the next generation, and throughout all of it, absolute celibacy. The flame could never die. Neither could the virgin's purity. Both symbolized Rome's eternal life. Every morning before dawn, the Vestals rose to tend the sacred fire in Vesta's circular temple. This wasn't symbolic housekeeping. Romans genuinely believed that if the flame died, catastrophe would follow. Famine, military defeat, the collapse of the state. When the fire did go out, the responsible Vestal was stripped and beaten by the Pontifex Maximus himself. But fire tending was only the beginning. Vestals prepared the mola salsa, sacred salt cake used in all public sacrifices. They guarded Rome's most precious secrets, wills of emperors, treaties, sacred objects, whose very names were forbidden to speak aloud. They performed rituals so ancient that by the imperial period, no one fully understood their origins. The Vestals lived in luxury that would make senators weep with envy. They received enormous stipends from the state treasury. They owned property, an unthinkable privilege for Roman women. They sat in reserved seats at gladiatorial games, front and center. When a Vestal's carriage passed through the streets, lictors cleared the way. Even consuls gave them a rite of passage. If a condemned prisoner glimpsed a Vestal on his way to execution, he received automatic clemency. Their word could pardon death itself. But privilege came wrapped in surveillance. A Vestal could not speak freely with men, could not leave the Atrium Vestae without permission, could not touch wine except during ritual, could not let her hair down in public. Every interaction was monitored, every movement scrutinized. The slightest rumor, a lingering glance, a private conversation, an anonymous accusation could trigger investigation by the College of Pontiffs. And here's what matters. The system didn't require proof, only suspicion. When power depends on symbols rather than substance, protecting the symbol becomes more important than protecting the person. Once accused, a Vestal had almost no defense. Roman law presumed innocence in most cases, but not here. The burden of proof inverted. She had to prove her purity, an impossible standard when purity was defined as the absence of rumor. The trial was conducted by the pontiffs, all men, all invested in maintaining the appearance of sacred order. If found guilty, or even if the verdict was politically convenient, the sentence was fixed by tradition. She would be buried alive. Roman law strictly forbade burials within the city walls. The dead were pollution, contamination, a threat to the sacred boundary of the Pomerium. But when they needed to execute a Vestal, the law bent itself into a knot. Because technically, they weren't burying her. They were immuring her, sealing her in an underground chamber with a bed, a lamp, and a small amount of bread, water, and milk. Just enough to maintain the fiction that they weren't directly killing her. The gods would decide her fate. If she was truly innocent, divine intervention would save her. It never did. The procession moved in absolute silence. The Vestal was dressed in funeral clothes and carried through the forum in a covered litter. No one could look upon her face. At the campus Sceleratus, the field of wickedness, a small underground chamber waited. She descended the ladder. The executioners sealed the entrance with earth and stone. Then, Rome went about its business. At least 18 Vestals died this way over Rome's 1,000-year history. Some were guilty of actual affairs, others were simply convenient scapegoats when Rome needed to explain military defeats or natural disasters. When something went wrong, the Vestals were audited first. If a Vestal survived her 3 decades, and most did, she faced an extraordinary choice. She could marry. Roman men considered former Vestals the ultimate prize. Wealthy, educated, connected, and symbolically pure, despite now being available. The Pontifex Maximus often arranged these marriages personally, brokering alliances between powerful families. A retired Vestal brought status, property, and a pension for life. But here's the twist. Many chose not to marry. Because marriage meant re-entering the traditional Roman household structure, passing from the authority of the state back into the authority of a husband. An unmarried former Vestal remained in legal limbo, the only truly autonomous woman in ancient Rome. She could own property, manage wealth, live independently, make decisions without male oversight. She was still a woman apart, still touched by the sacred. Some former Vestals continued living in the Atrium Vestae, mentoring younger priestesses, managing temple affairs, wielding influence without the surveillance. Others vanished into comfortable private life, finally free to let their hair down, drink wine, speak freely. After 30 years of performing Rome's purity, they could finally be human. The Vestal virgins endured for over 1,000 years, from Rome's foundation myths until 394 AD, when Christian Emperor Theodosius finally disbanded the order. By then, the empire was collapsing, the sacred fire no longer a priority. But the pattern they embodied, women granted extraordinary privilege in exchange for extraordinary restriction, then punished brutally when the symbol cracked, that pattern didn't end with Rome. What the Vestals reveal isn't ancient peculiarity. It's the inevitable logic of systems that elevate people as symbols rather than individuals. Whenever a person's value depends on representing an ideal, purity, loyalty, patriotism, brand image, their humanity becomes negotiable. The moment the symbol is threatened, the person is sacrificed to preserve it. Watch for this in your own world. The whistleblower fired to protect institutional reputation, the employee punished for honesty that threatens the company narrative, the public figure destroyed the moment they complicate their assigned role. The Vestals were buried alive to keep the story clean. We've gotten more sophisticated in our methods, but the underlying transaction, your autonomy for our symbol, your truth for our comfort, remains exactly the same. The question isn't whether you'll encounter this pattern, it's whether you'll recognize it before you're standing at the edge of the chamber.